Hello everyone, I am Alfian and today we are going to solve the Leetcode challenge called the valid parenthesis. And for this particular challenge, we are tasked to return either true or false to the isValid function right here. And the function contains the parameter of the called the string. And for the description it says given a string S containing just the characters of parenthesis, curly bracket, and the square brackets determine if the input string is valid. An input string is valid if number 1, open brackets must be closed by the same type of brackets, and for the number 2, open brackets must be closed in the correct order, and for the number 3, every close bracket has a corresponding open bracket of the same type. So for the example 1 right here, if we look over here, if the opening is the open parenthesis, the closing bracket is also just usual parenthesis, and hence the output is true. Why? Because it matches the pair of the parentheses like usual. And for the example 2, the input S has the string of several parentheses right here, and the output is also true. And also why is because the pair meets all of the criteria right here. Every opening is also meeting with the closing, and also the opening also meets the closing of the same type. And for this example number 3, it's a false because the opening is just a normal parenthesis, but the closing parenthesis is the square brackets, hence the output is false. And for the last example, this one is kind of tricky to implement. This is returning true. Why? It's because it's accepting the open parenthesis right here, and also open square bracket, and also for this closing brackets is followed by the square, and then lastly it's the closing parenthesis symbol. And so for the constraint, it's only a string's length of 10 of the power of 4, and then the S parameter only consists of parentheses that only has these characters to be inserted into the parameters right here. So for the parameters only contains this parameter, so it doesn't have any numbers or alphabetical or uppercase or lowercase letter or other symbols other than these symbols already listed right here. And then for the hint, we should use a stack of characters, and of course we should use an array to declare a stack of characters. Why? An array is used to check if the last element is another opening bracket or a close bracket, like for the example 4 right here. So let's say if we are using a traditional for loop iteration of the string, and the string is iteratable because a string is another form of array of characters. So the open parenthesis right here, and for the next iteration it's also a square bracket, and for the next iteration check if it is meeting the pair of the last iteration of the last element of the iteration, which is the last element of iteration, in other words is the stack that we are currently working in. If it the pair of the last element from the stack, we should continue our iteration. If it's not, then we should return false prematurely, and we don't have to go through all of the string iteration because it's already false. So that's why we are opting to use stack. And for the hint number 2, when we encounter an opening bracket, push it to the top of the stack. Like, let me elaborate on this part. So we are accepting every open bracket to the stack of the array. Let's say if we are iterating this string right here, the first iteration is the open parenthesis, and the second iteration is also an open parenthesis. And for the next one, we can also include curly brackets or any open brackets, like for example curly brackets, square brackets, or just a normal open parenthesis right here. So it's always open for the any parenthesis into the stack of the array. And for the hint number 3, when we encounter a closing bracket, check if the top of the stack, like I said earlier, which is the last element of the stack, is the one that matches the type of the bracket. What's the opening for it? If yes, then pop it from the stack, otherwise return false. So why popping it from the stack? It's because we are tasked to eliminate every characters from the stack by comparing the last element to the current iteration if it's a closing bracket. In order to return it true, we have to eliminate all of the element inside the stack. If it still remains an open bracket like this, or if it still remains two elements like this, an open brackets and the square brackets, and there is nothing to be iterated anymore from the parameter, then we should return false, because they both didn't match any of the closing, or they didn't find the pair that we are wanted to. So let me declare a variable called the let stack that takes an empty string, and then we declaring a for loop, a traditional for loop like usual. Since we are using TypeScript, then we are going to use let I, which is equal to 0, and as long as the I is below the length of the string that takes the length property of the string parameter, we should increment the I by 1. In other words, iterating all of the character inside the string parameter right here. So let me visualize this by using this Excalibur drawing. So let's say if we have a character like this, and let's declare our stack right here. So for the first iteration, which is an open parenthesis, we welcome it and insert it into the stack. And for the second iteration, which is a close parenthesis and it compares to the stack right here on the last element of the stack, which is the open parenthesis right here, and we compare it to the exact pair that we want to, and it should pop from the stack. Popping from the stack or popping from the array is another word of removing the last element from the array. So we are returning an empty array, because an empty array and the stack is empty. It's because the iteration right here already matched and already found the pair of the type of the bracket right here. And so for the third iteration, which is the curly brackets, open curly brackets, of course we are welcoming any open bracket. And also for the last iteration, which is close bracket, close curly bracket, and it compares, the current iteration compares the last element of the stack, which is the open curly brackets, and it matches the pair right here, so we are popping the stack again. So in order to accept any of the open brackets, let me zoom this. Accept any open brackets, we use Array.push. And for this one, we are using the stack as the variable name of the array, and we are pushing this one inside the array. And if it matches the pair, then we are removing. In order to remove the last element, last element, we are using the stack or the array pop. Okay, so this one returns true. Okay, so what about another one? If it's just like this, square brackets, open brackets, and then close square brackets. So let's iterate this one. For the first iteration right here, we are pushing the first element into the stack of the array. So that's where we are using push and then inserting this into the stack array. And the last element is of course the open square brackets. And let's iterate the next one, which is the open parenthesis. So since it's an open bracket, then we are pushing into the stack of the array. And the last element is the open parenthesis right here. And for the last iteration, which is the close square brackets, and check if the last element of the stack is the pair of the square brackets right here. Since the last element it's not the matching pair of the close square brackets right here, and we are stopping the iteration. And after stopping iteration, we are simply returning false. Why? It's because the last element of the stack is not matches the current iteration that we are in. It is the close square brackets, and this one is the open parenthesis. And also it does the same thing if it's just a close parenthesis right here, and it treats the same thing as we iterate right here. And for the third iteration is a close square brackets, and we are returning false because it doesn't match. Since it's returning false, then we don't have to iterate the fourth element. Okay, so what about an empty string? Like this, an empty string. For the for loop, we should add a check if the stack is not empty or the length above 0, the stack of the array. If it's already empty and we are not meeting any of the characters, so we are simply returning false. So let's implement this. Let's implement this by using the for loop, and then we add a check if it's, like I said earlier, if it's any of the open brackets, then we are going to accept it inserting into the stack array. If the current iteration of the s is equals to any of the open brackets, one parenthesis right here, or let's copy this, or the current iteration is equals the open square brackets, or the current iteration is equals to open curly brackets. If it is, then we are adding the character of the current iteration to the array using the push. Inside the push contains the parameter, which is the string that of the current iteration. Okay, so let's add an else check, and check if we are already have 0 in the stack of the array, or let's say if for the else clause, check if the current iteration is not any of the open brackets right here, which is the close brackets variant. If the stack of the length is above 0, and check if the current iteration is equals any of the close brackets or closing parenthesis, which is close parenthesis and then close square brackets, and then for the next one is close close curly brackets. But we cannot simply use the OR statement right here. We need to pair this with the last element of the stack array. Like I mentioned earlier, we can simply use the stack that takes the index of the last element of the stack, which is using the stack.length -1, since an array will start from 0 and the length is always one number higher, and length also starts with 1. So that's why we are using the -1 right here to match the last element of the stack array right here, and check if the last element of the stack is equals to pair of the brackets using the AND sign, using the AND operator right here, and matches the close parenthesis right here. And also the same thing also goes to the square bracket if the last element of the stack is a open square brackets, or the last element is an open curly bracket. I'm comparing this with the AND operator and check if the stack length is above 0. Why stack dot length is above 0? Or in other words, check if the current stack is not empty. It's because, let me visualize this. Let's say if we have, let me make this color to red to tell if this one is invalid string composition. Okay, so let's say if our stack is currently empty, and then for the current iteration we are meeting with just close brackets right here, not any of the open brackets, because the stack is empty, because stack is already empty, or the length, in other words, the length is already 0, since the current iteration is the close brackets and the stack is empty, which is that we don't have anything to compare to or to find any match from the close brackets right here or the close parenthesis. So that's why we are simply returning false and render this string invalid, because it doesn't have any pairs to begin with. So let's go back to our implementation, and we are simply returning stack pop. The stack pop does like this. Let's go back to our first example right here. If the first iteration is an open brackets right here, and we are inserting the open parenthesis into the stack, and then for the next iteration, which is the close brackets inside this else clause right here, and the if check is already meets the requirements, because the stack is already has the length of 1, and the stack of the last element is the open parenthesis, and it's an open parenthesis, and with the end the current iteration is a close parenthesis right here. And for the current iteration, yes, we have the close parenthesis right here. So that's why we are returning pop right here, and popping it's removing the last element from the array like this. And then for the next iteration is open curly brackets, and we are inserting 1 by pushing the current iteration into the stack array. And for the next one is a close curly brackets, and since the last element is open brackets, then we are returning pop, which is removing the element from the stack, and we are returning true because the stack is already empty. So let's finish our implementation by using return stack.length, check if it's equals 0 or the stack length if it's empty. And because the stack.length is already 0, compares it to 0 will return true. If the stack length is equals 1, compares it to the 0 and it will return false. As simple as that. So let's run this code to see if it works by using the control apostrophe. So let's submit our code using the control enter. And it has wrong answer. Why? Because I forgot to add another else clause right here to check if it doesn't meet any of the check right here. The length is equal 0 or the length is above 0 but it doesn't meet any of the check right here, or doesn't meet any pairs of the current iteration, then we can simply return false like I visualized earlier. Okay, so let's run the code again. Okay, so for the runtime is 2 milliseconds, which is nice, and also for the memory aspect, which is not that nice, and it stays in the middle. Why it stays in the middle? It's because our implementation right here, if we look over the tag variable right here, it has the array, and we are using an array throughout our implementation, so that's why it takes memory space right here. So that's about it. I hope you understand my explanation. If you still don't understand, you can ask in the comment section, or if you have any better solutions, you can also point it out and tell us in the comment section, and don't be shy. Of course, I will welcome any of your inputs. So that's about it. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.